What would you do if you woke up tomorrow and your entire family was gone? Not missing, not in the hospital, gone, the way you can never come back from. On a cold January night in 1984, a family in Aurora, Colorado went to sleep feeling completely safe. By morning, 3 of them were dead. And the one who survived, a 3-year-old little girl, would spend the rest of her life carrying something no child should ever have to carry. This is their story, and it starts the way most tragedies do, with something small, something nobody thought twice about. Aurora, Colorado in 1984 was the kind of place people moved to when they were ready to build something real. Quiet streets, new neighborhoods, young families unpacking boxes and learning their neighbors' names. It sat just east of Denver, close enough to the city, far enough to feel like you could breathe. The Bennetts belonged here. Bruce was 27. He had served in the Navy as a sonar analyst at Pearl Harbor. When his service ended, he came home with one clear picture in his head: a stable job, a good home, a family he could protect. He was studying to become an air traffic controller. Nights and weekends, books open on the kitchen table, eyes tired but steady. Deborah was 26. She had lost her mother young and stepped into the role of caretaker for her siblings before she was old enough to understand what that meant. Life made her strong early. When she met Bruce through her brother Larry, something in her settled. They married young. They meant it. In 1983, they bought their first home on East Center Drive in Aurora. The day Bruce stood in that doorway and looked at those walls that were finally completely theirs, said everything, no words needed. They ran the family furniture business together, and their 2 daughters were everything. Melissa was 7, turning 8 in just a few days. She filled every room she walked into. Her mother had planned a school party for later that week. Melissa called it her real birthday. But that Sunday evening, the family gathered at home first. Just the people who loved her most. Vanessa was 3, the baby, still at the age where the world is mostly magic and nothing is scary. She had no reason to think otherwise. That evening, the house was alive. Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, was there. So were his brothers, Richard and Daniel. Someone had given Melissa an organ as a gift. She played it the way a 7-year-old plays anything new, badly, loudly, with complete joy. The knife came down through the birthday cake. Everyone leaned in. Melissa's face caught the candlelight and she was glowing. There was laughter. Comfortable, layered kind that only happens when people genuinely love being in the same room. Then slowly, the evening wound down. Coats came on. Hugs were exchanged. One by one, they stepped out into the cold January air. But before he left, one of the uncles paused at the door and looked back. The garage door was still open. He said it out loud. "Make sure Bruce closes it before bed." The message was passed along. Bruce nodded. Then the warmth of the house pulled him back inside. The girls needed to be tucked in. The night was long, and the garage door, just this once, slipped from his mind. Outside, the light from inside the garage stretched out across the snow, a long yellow rectangle cutting into the darkness. Still, quiet, completely open. The house went dark, room by room. Bruce and Deborah settled in. Melissa drifted off, probably still humming something. Vanessa curled up in her little bed, 3 years old, wrapped in the kind of sleep that only belongs to children who have never been afraid. Outside, Aurora was silent, snow on the ground, cold air sitting heavy over the neighborhood. But something was already moving through that silence. A figure, unhurried, patient, moving through the dark the way someone does when they are not afraid of being seen, scanning houses, looking for the easiest way in, not emotional, not rushed. Just looking. And then he saw it. That yellow rectangle in the snow. A garage door standing wide open, like an invitation he had been waiting for. He didn't force anything. He didn't break anything. He simply stepped into the light, and his shadow swallowed it whole. Monday morning, January 16th, 1984. The phones at the family furniture store rang early. Bruce and Deborah hadn't shown up. That had never happened before. Not once. The calls to the house went unanswered. Every single one. Connie didn't wait for an explanation. She already knew something was wrong the way a mother knows. Before the facts, before the proof, somewhere deep and wordless, she got in her car and drove. When she turned onto East Center Drive, the garage door was still open. She walked toward the house. The yard was too quiet. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The silence hit her first. Not peaceful silence. The other kind. The kind that sits wrong in your chest before your eyes even have time to catch up. She moved further inside, and she looked toward the foot of the stairs, and her brain refused. That is what happens when a person sees something that cannot be real. The mind stalls. searches for another explanation, tries to hold on to the world as it was just 10 seconds ago. But the world had already changed. She ran, she screamed, she hammered on the neighbor's door with both fists until it opened. What Connie found inside that house would mark her for the rest of her life. And the investigation that followed would drag on for decades, because the man who walked through that garage door left almost nothing behind. Almost. No name, no face. Just a shadow that had already disappeared into the snow. But somewhere in that house, buried in the silence, the answers were waiting, and they had been waiting for a very, very long time. The 911 call came in at 10:28 in the morning. By the time the first officers arrived on East Center Drive, Connie Bennett was standing on the snow-covered lawn, not screaming anymore. The screaming had run out. What was left was something quieter and far worse. That blank, hollow stillness of a person whose mind has gone somewhere else because staying present is no longer possible. She had gone inside. She had seen it. And now she could not unsee it. The officers moved past her and through the garage. Bruce Bennett was at the foot of the stairs. He was found at the foot of the stairs, the victim of a devastating and violent encounter. He had sustained severe, blunt force trauma that spoke to the sheer brutality of the attack. The kind of force that doesn't stop when it should, that keeps going long past the point of reason. Clumps of his hair were scattered on the floor, on the wall, on the staircase above him. But that wasn't what ended his life. He had suffered a fatal injury, one that left no doubt about the intruder's intent, that whoever did this had stood over Bruce while he was still on that floor, still trying to survive, and made a choice, deliberate, final. He had fought back. The bloodied handprints dragging up the banister said so. A man trying to pull himself up, trying to get back to his family. He just couldn't get there. The master bedroom was at the top of the stairs. Deborah was on the floor at the foot of the bed. The room around her told the story before the body did. Dresser drawers yanked open, clothes thrown, a wallet dumped and emptied on the floor. Someone had moved through this room fast and careless, looking for cash, not finding enough to slow down. She had been victimized in the most horrific way imaginable before her life was taken. A detective who had spent over 2 decades working homicide had to turn his back to that room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, jaw tight, and looked at the wall instead. Then he kept working. Because that was the job. The door to the girls' room was the last one. Melissa was on the floor between the 2 small twin beds, 7 years old. The scene was disturbed in a way that showed a calculated, chilling level of intent. A child's blanket had been laid over her face. She had raised her right hand against whatever was coming. There were clear signs that she had tried to protect herself until the very end. A 7-year-old girl fighting back in the dark. It wasn't enough. The other twin bed was soaked through with blood. And then, one of the firefighters heard something. Faint. So faint he almost missed it. He moved toward the narrow gap between the bed and the wall and crouched down low. There, pressed into that small dark space, was Vanessa, 3 years old, barely breathing, but alive. The doctors at Children's Hospital in Denver used the word miracle. In this case, they meant it. Vanessa had sustained life-threatening injuries that left the doctors in disbelief. She had been assaulted. She had lost so much blood the team needed multiple units just to stabilize her. She was in a coma before the ambulance even reached the hospital. The outlook, the doctor said, was uncertain. Connie Bennett, the woman who had just found her son's body at the bottom of a staircase, sat in a hospital waiting room and prayed for the one who was still breathing. And somehow, against everything, Vanessa held on. Back on East Center Drive, the work continued. Through every room, investigators moved slowly, carefully, collecting anything that might one day point to a name. Bloody boot prints tracked across the floors, all the same shoe, a hiking boot, moving room to room and then out through the garage into the snow. Those prints belonged to no one who had been at that birthday party, no one who had any reason to be there. Outside in the snow, they found the kitchen knife. It had come from the Bennett's own carving set, taken from their kitchen and used against them. The hammer was gone. The attacker had brought it in and walked it back out. That single fact told investigators more than almost anything else at the scene. This was not a person who lost control and panicked. This was someone who came prepared, someone who planned to leave. The DNA evidence collected from the scene couldn't be processed, not in 1984. The technology didn't exist. A blood type, that was all the lab could give them, so the samples were sealed, labeled, and stored away. And the man who had walked out through that garage into the January dark, he was already gone. No name, no face, just boot prints disappearing into the snow. But what no one in Aurora knew yet, what no investigator standing in that house that morning could have known, was that this was not his first time, not even close. The killer was gone, but the evidence left behind told a story, and it started way before that night. Every case on this channel takes nearly 15 days of research, digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If that matters to you, please like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which part of this case hit you hardest. The links to more solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Now, back to the case. The Bennett family did not come first. That is the part that makes this story even harder to sit with. By the time Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa were killed, this man had already done this. More than once, to more than one family, and nobody had connected the dots yet. Nobody even knew they were looking for the same person. Go back 12 days, January 4th, 1984, Aurora, Colorado. James and Kimberly Habenchild had gone to bed like any other night. James had spent the evening recording music for a friend, the kind of low-key, ordinary thing people do when the world feels completely safe. Kimberly had already turned in. The house was quiet. The garage door had been left open. Somewhere in the early hours, the darkness inside their bedroom changed. Kimberly woke up to pain. Something had struck her in the head, fast, hard, no warning. She caught the briefest glimpse before she screamed, a silhouette standing over her, already moving. James came running and was met with a hammer to the skull. The blow fractured it. He went down. By the time police arrived, the attacker was gone. Kimberly's purse had been emptied of its cash. The footprints in the snow outside led to the pavement and disappeared. Both survived. Aurora exhaled. They shouldn't have. January 10th, Lakewood, Colorado. Patricia Smith was 50 years old. She had moved from Nebraska to help her daughter settle into a new home. Warm, graceful, well-liked, the kind of person everyone described the same way. That Thursday, she ran her errands, picked up lunch, and came home. Her food was still on the table when her daughter found her that evening. Still there, untouched, like she had been interrupted mid-step and never came back. Patricia was in the living room. She was the victim of an unthinkable attack, one that involved both severe physical force and personal violation. And when it was over, her body had been covered, deliberately, carefully, with a child's Winnie the Pooh blanket, one that belonged to her grandchildren. The hammer used to kill her was left nearby. Her purse had been rifled upstairs, the television still running in an empty room. Patricia had no enemies, no drama. She had simply come home to a house with another yawning garage door. That same evening, less than 25 miles away, Donna Dixon, 28, a flight attendant, pulled into her garage after a long day. Her boyfriend Ron Holm was away on an overnight flight. She stepped out of her car. One blow. Temple. She was down before she understood what was happening. Ron came home the next morning and followed a trail of blood from the garage to the bedroom where Donna was lying on the bed, alive, but barely. She had no memory of dragging herself inside. She had no memory of the garage. She had no memory of the face that had been close enough to touch. That void, where the attacker's face should have been, would never be filled. The injury had taken it permanently. Not just the trauma of that night, but the one piece of evidence that could have identified him. His face. Gone. Erased by the very blow he delivered. A blood-soaked hammer sat on the driver's seat of her car. 3 attacks, 12 days, 2 cities, a hammer, an open entry point, sexual assault, cash taken, nothing else. And in Patricia's case, a body covered with a blanket, as if something in this man needed to conceal what he had done even as he kept doing it. Once investigators laid the cases side by side, the pattern was undeniable. Same weapon, same entry, same choreography of violence. But the killer moved faster than the system could keep up. Different jurisdictions, different departments, different filing cabinets, no centralized database. No algorithm, just human beings trying to connect paper to paper across city lines while the clock kept running. On January 24th, the FBI sent in a profiler named Ron Walker. He studied the files, the photographs, the evidence. And then he described the man they were looking for in short, direct strokes. White male, early 20s, limited education, not academic, but calculating. Controlled, likely worked construction or a trade, someone who knew how homes were built and how quietly a person could move through one. Not a stalker, not fixated on specific victims. An opportunist, someone hunting for the easiest door. And then Walker said the thing that settled over that room like a cold weight. This man will not stop, not until he is caught or dead. The community was already fracturing. People who had never locked their garages were checking them twice a night. Hardware stores couldn't keep locks on the shelves. Some families slept with weapons nearby. There were reports, almost unbelievable, but true, of people wearing helmets to bed. That was the level of fear, not paranoia. Real, rational terror that this person could be outside any house, on any street, waiting for one door left open. And then, the attacks stopped. No more incidents in Colorado, no more calls in the night, just silence where the violence had been. It should have felt like relief. But Walker's words hadn't gone anywhere. This man does not stop. The silence meant one thing. He had moved. While Aurora was still burying its dead, he was already gone. No name left behind. No face anyone could describe clearly. Just a pattern of violence that ended as suddenly as it started, and a city left trying to make sense of something that had no sense in it. He didn't stop. He just moved. January 27, 1984, Kingman, Arizona. 11 days after the Bennett murders, Roy Williams woke up to searing pain. A stranger was standing over him, using a heavy object found nearby to inflict life-threatening injuries. Not a weapon he had carried in, but something he had picked up from the earth itself, raw and heavy and without any distance between the hand and the damage it caused. Roy looked up at the man above him and asked a question. "Why are you doing this?" Silence. The attacker stopped. Something in those words, or maybe the stillness behind them, reached something. He stood there for a moment, then he walked out. Roy survived. 100 stitches, several broken ribs, but alive and conscious, and he had seen the face. A few hours later, a patrol officer spotted a disheveled man near a truck stop a quarter mile from Roy's home, trying to thumb a ride on the interstate. The officer pulled over, asked questions, then asked to see the man's shoes. The tread matched the impressions at Roy's house. The man ran. Officers found him moments later behind a bush, out of breath and out of room. His name was Alex Christopher Ewing, 23 years old. What investigators found when they started pulling on that thread was not complexity. It was something almost more unsettling, a man who had simply never been stalked. Ewing had left a trail of petty thefts across half a dozen states, never staying long enough to leave a real footprint. Juvenile detention. A brief stint in foster care, 2 weeks before he walked away from that too. By 1983, he was in Denver working construction in Aurora and Lakewood. The same streets, the same neighborhoods, the same houses backing onto open land with garages that stayed unlocked after dark. He wasn't hunting specific people. He was reading vulnerability the way some people read a room. And those neighborhoods had given him everything he needed to study. By August 1984, Ewing was in custody awaiting trial and being transferred between facilities. The convoy stopped in Henderson, Nevada to refuel. The guards went inside to pay. The bell above the shop door jingled. The smell of gasoline sat heavy in the parking lot air. Ewing was in the restroom. And then he wasn't. He walked out into the Nevada afternoon in a bright red jumpsuit, a target in plain sight, and simply kept moving. The guards didn't realize he was gone until another inmate asked where he was. By then, he was already in a residential neighborhood nearby. That same night, Nancy and Chris Berry were asleep in their home. Nancy woke because her son stirred. She went downstairs to make him a bottle. She saw a man at her back door holding an axe handle. She ran for the stairs. He followed. What happened in that bedroom was savage and without pause. Chris suffered head injuries so severe they left him with permanent brain damage. Nancy's hands were broken. She survived only because she went completely still, played dead, gave him nothing, and he stopped. He set the axe handle on the table downstairs and walked out. Nancy waited until the silence held. Then she called 911. For 4 days, Ewing moved through the Nevada desert. No money, no food, just motion. The only thing he had ever been consistently good at. On the 4th day, a telephone operator called police. She had overheard a collect call from the Lake Mead area, a man's voice telling someone he had escaped and needed his brother to come get him. Rangers found him at the payphone, dehydrated, barely able to run. He tried anyway. An officer raised his weapon. "Stop, or we shoot." He stopped. 2 hours at trial. Guilty on all counts. 110 years, the maximum Nevada allowed. The judge's intent was plain, not just punishment, but permanent removal. Ewing was processed into a Nevada correctional facility. And then, as far as Colorado was concerned, he simply ceased to exist. His files sat in a Nevada cabinet. Their grief sat in Colorado. In 1984, that border might as well have been an ocean. 2 sets of evidence staring at each other across 30 years and never once making contact. Connie Bennett attended every update. Every meeting, every time the phone rang, she picked it up hoping. Vanessa grew up in the wreckage of a night she couldn't remember, carrying injuries that needed no memory to be real. And Ewing sat in his cell, unremarkable, no infractions, no red flags. Just a man doing time quietly, invisibly, until he started filling out parole paperwork, until he set up a profile on a dating site, genuinely convinced he was walking out soon. He had no idea what was already closing in. The evidence was always there. That is the part that sits heaviest when you look back at this case. The answer, the actual biological proof of who did this, was sitting in a storage facility in Colorado for decades, sealed, labeled, waiting. The evidence never went anywhere. The world just wasn't ready to read it yet. The night of January 16, 1984, investigators collected everything they could from the Bennett home: semen, from the carpet beneath Melissa's body, from a comforter in the girls' room, carefully swabbed, carefully packaged, carefully logged. The investigators knew what it meant. This was the closest thing to a signature the killer had left behind. Biological, undeniable, his. But when the samples reached the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the answer came back like a door closing quietly in their faces. We can give you a blood type. That was it. That was the limit of what science could do in 1984. A blood type that narrowed the suspect pool to millions and told them almost nothing useful at all. So the samples were sealed, stored, set aside with the stubborn hope that one day the technology would catch up to what the evidence already knew. 5 years passed. In 1989, an investigator reviewing the case files noticed something that should have been caught long before. The comforter, one of the most important pieces of evidence from the girls' room, had never been submitted to the state crime lab, not in 1984. Not in any of the years between. Collected, logged, and then simply never sent. 5 years, in a box, untested. While Vanessa Bennett was relearning how to walk, how to talk, how to move through a world that had been violently rearranged around her, that comforter was gathering dust in a storage facility 2 miles away. The oversight was corrected immediately. The comforter was submitted. The results came back over a year later. Partial profile, not enough. Then in 1990, something else was found buried in the evidence. A single microscopic forensic sample. Small, easy to miss, but potentially the most direct link to the identity of the person. It was sent for specialized testing immediately, handled carefully, logged with something that felt, cautiously, like hope. The test destroyed it. The very process designed to extract the truth consumed the only thing that held it. No result, no profile, nothing left, just silence. That silence said everything about where this case was headed, and how long the wait was going to be. The 1990s passed. The case stayed open but cold. The kind of cold that settles in when there is nothing left to chase and the world keeps moving around, a grief that refuses to. Old computers hummed through databases that held almost nothing useful. Case files sat in folders that grew thicker with dead ends. The technology that existed in those years could do remarkable things, but not this, not yet. Then, in 1999, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation came back to the evidence. New techniques, new tools. The locked door of 1984 was finally, slowly beginning to open. 2 years of careful work on the original samples. In 2001, they had it. A full DNA profile, a complete genetic fingerprint, the kind that could identify one person out of 18 million. Not a blood type, not a partial sequence. The real thing. 17 years after the murders, the evidence had finally given up its secret. The investigators who had never stopped working this case allowed themselves, quietly, to feel something close to hope. They ran the profile through CODIS, the national DNA database, built from samples collected from convicted offenders across the country. No match. The profile was complete, precise. It knew exactly who it belonged to. But the man it pointed to was not in the system. The key existed. There was simply no lock yet to put it in. 15 more years gone. Connie Bennett was in her 70s now, still showing up, still asking questions, still carrying the weight of a morning in January 1984 that had never fully released her. Investigators ran the profile through CODIS again, a routine check on a case that refused to be forgotten. This time, something came back. Not a suspect, a connection. The DNA from the Bennett crime scene matched DNA from another unsolved murder, Patricia Smith. Lakewood. January 10, 1984. 2 cases, 2 cities, 1 genetic signature linking them to the same man. What investigators had believed for decades based on pattern and instinct was now confirmed by science. The case files went to Parabon Nanolabs. Using only the DNA itself, their analysts built a physical description of the suspect: skin tone, eye color, facial structure, ancestry, all pulled from the genetic code without a single witness. A face emerged, not a photograph, not a name, but after 32 years of nothing, a face. Connie Bennett looked at it. It was something, more than they had ever had, but the system still hadn't given them a name to put beneath it. That same year, Nevada passed a new law requiring every prison inmate to submit a DNA sample for entry into CODIS. It should have moved quickly. It didn't. The law came with no deadline, no enforcement window, no requirement to finish by any particular date, so it moved the way things move when no one is watching the clock, slowly, unevenly, buried under backlog and paperwork and the quiet assumption that it would get done eventually. In a Nevada correctional facility, Alex Ewing was eventually swabbed. His sample was collected and bagged and added to the pile. Then it sat there, 2 years. 2 more years while Connie aged and Vanessa carried her paralysis, and the Parabon composite stared out of a case file at a world that still didn't know his name. 2 years while Ewing filled out parole documents in his cell, while he set up a profile on a dating site, while he genuinely, completely believed he was about to walk out of that prison a free man. And then, 1 week after his DNA was finally entered into the database, CODIS returned a result, a match, perfect, undeniable. The genetic fingerprint pulled from the carpet beneath Melissa Bennett's body in 1984 had finally found its owner. 34 years. A destroyed hair. A comforter that sat untested for 5 years. A profile with no lock. A law with no deadline. The evidence had never given up. It had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. And somewhere in a Nevada prison, a man who thought he was about to go free had no idea that science had just caught up to him completely. The call came on a Tuesday evening, July 10, 2018, 9:15 p.m. Detective Steve Connor had worked the Bennett case for years. He knew the files the way you know something you have carried a long time, not just the facts, but the weight of them. The birthday party, the garage door, the boot prints in the snow. Vanessa in the gap between the bed and the wall, barely breathing. His phone rang. His supervisor. "We got a CODIS hit on the Bennett case." Connor asked where it came from. An inmate. Out in Nevada. 1 week. That was all it had taken after Ewing's DNA was finally entered into the system. 34 years of silence, and then 1 week. Connor asked for the name, Alex Ewing. He went through every report, every file, every name that had ever surfaced in the Bennett investigation across 3.5 decades of work, thousands of pages, hundreds of leads that went nowhere. Alex Ewing had never appeared once, not in a tip, not in a background check, not in a single line of a case file that had grown enormous with dead ends. Somewhere in those stacks of paper, all that time, all that effort, his name simply did not exist. A man who had walked through that garage door, destroyed an entire family, and then vanished so completely that 34 years of professional investigation had never once produced his name. The perfect invisible predator. Before anyone moved, they needed more than a database result. A team of Colorado detectives flew to Nevada. They did not identify themselves as connected to the Colorado murders. Just a conversation, routine, nothing to be alarmed about. Ewing talked freely. He mentioned his father's Air Force career. He talked about spinal meningitis, an illness, he said, that had changed him, altered something fundamental in who he was. And then, without being directly asked, he talked about work. Construction in Aurora and Lakewood, the same streets, the same neighborhoods where 4 people had been killed in 12 days. He placed himself there, in his own words, in the same city, at the same time, doing the kind of work that would have made him invisible in those developing suburbs. The detectives kept their faces steady, kept listening. The next day they came back with photographs. 6 black and white images laid out in front of him. Crime scenes, victims, details from cases he had never been officially tied to. Ewing looked at each one, denied everything, calm. The practiced ease of a man who had been carrying this for 34 years and had long since buried it somewhere unreachable. Then, one of the detectives placed a color photograph on the table. Patricia Smith, alive. A woman in her 50s, warm and ordinary. Someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone who had moved from Nebraska to be closer to her family. Ewing said he didn't know her, steady, unbothered. The detective reached into the folder one more time. Patricia Smith. The way her daughter had found her, the living room floor, the Winnie the Pooh blanket, everything the crime scene had recorded about what had been done to her on January 10, 1984. The change in Ewing was immediate, not dramatic, not loud. Just a shift. Something behind the eyes, a stillness that was different from the stillness before. The ease that had carried him through 2 days of conversation cracked open, quietly, like ice giving way beneath weight it can no longer hold. He said there must be some mistake. Then he asked for a lawyer. A court order was secured, a DNA swab taken directly from Ewing. The sample was processed. The results left no room for argument. The DNA from the carpet beneath Melissa Bennett's body, the DNA from Patricia Smith's living room, both matched Alex Christopher Ewing. Perfectly, completely, the kind of certainty that makes defense arguments feel like noise. On August 10, 2018, investigators from Aurora and Lakewood stood in front of cameras. They had their man. What followed was not simple. In his cell in Nevada, Ewing had been building toward freedom for months. Parole paperwork, personal statements, the careful, patient work of a man who genuinely believed the finish line was close. He had a dating profile ready. He had plans for the life waiting on the other side of those prison walls. Time for Alex Ewing had been frozen somewhere around 1984. He had lived inside those walls, unremarkable and invisible, while the world outside changed around him, and he had convinced himself that the past had stayed as frozen as he had. It hadn't. The past had been moving the entire time. Slowly, quietly, unstoppably, through storage facilities and crime labs and DNA databases, it had been moving straight toward him. Colorado filed extradition papers. Ewing's legal team responded immediately. Appeals challenging the constitutionality of the transfer, questioning the handling of DNA evidence across state lines, filing every procedural argument available to slow the inevitable. For 16 months they kept filing. Each rejection followed by a new motion. Each closed door met with another knocked on. It was the desperation of a man watching the walls close in and throwing everything he had against them. The Nevada Supreme Court considered his arguments carefully, then rejected everyone. The DNA was sound. Colorado's claim was legitimate. The highest court in the land had no more time for Alex Ewing. The U.S. Supreme Court looked at his appeal and turned away. August 2020. 36 years after he had walked out of Aurora into the January dark, Alex Ewing was placed on a plane under strict security and flown back to Colorado. The aircraft descended through cold air. Below, the eastern edge of Denver spread out in the early light. The same suburbs, the same flat streets, the same quiet neighborhoods where families still moved in looking for safety and community and a fresh start. Snow on the ground. The same cold that had been there in January 1984 when 3 people were buried and a 3-year-old girl fought for her life in a hospital bed. Ewing landed in handcuffs. He was in the same city where Bruce Bennett had studied nights and weekends to build a future he never got to have. Where Deborah had finally found walls she could call her own. Where Melissa had gone to bed giggling after her birthday party. Where Vanessa had been found in the gap between a bed and a wall, barely breathing, and had somehow refused to let go. He was formally charged on arrival, 4 counts of first-degree murder. For 34 years he had moved, state to state, prison to parole hearing to dating profile, carrying what he had done as if distance and time could eventually make it disappear. But Colorado had never forgotten, and now, finally, neither could he. After 34 years, the man who thought he had escaped forever was going home to face every single thing he had done. The trial began in July 2021, 37 years after the birthday party, 37 years after the garage door, 37 years after Connie Bennett had walked into that house and found a world that could never be put back together. The courtroom was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when what is being said inside them is too heavy for noise. The prosecution laid out everything: the DNA, the behavioral profile that had described Ewing almost perfectly in 1984, the connections between the Bennett murders and Patricia Smith, the shoe prints, the timeline, decade after decade of evidence assembled piece by piece until the picture it formed was impossible to look away from. Ewing sat through all of it. And then Vanessa Bennett stood up. She was 40 years old, the 3-year-old girl who had been found in the gap between a bed and a wall, the one the doctors had called a miracle. The one Connie had prayed over in a hospital waiting room was standing in a Colorado courtroom facing the man who had taken everything from her before she was old enough to understand what everything meant. She looked at him and spoke. "I lost the person I was supposed to be." She said it plainly. No performance, no theatrics, just a woman telling the truth about what one night in 1984 had cost her across an entire lifetime. "I lost my sanity. I look in the mirror every day and I hate who I am. I hate what I had to go through and still go through. I hurt myself. I was a drug addict for so many years. I'm a very strong person. But when it comes to my family, that was the most important thing to me in the whole world. The courtroom was completely still, because Vanessa's life had not been simple, not even close. She had come out of that coma weeks after the attack. She had relearned how to walk, how to eat, how to move through a body that had been broken and reassembled. Physical therapy, surgery, a jaw rebuilt. A skull healed on the outside while everything on the inside was still trying to figure out what had happened. She went to live with Connie, Bruce's mother, the woman who had found the crime scene, who had carried that morning in her body every day since. Connie raised her. She took the last living piece of her son and poured everything she had left into keeping that piece alive and moving forward. It was an act of love so enormous it barely has a name. But love, no matter how complete, cannot undo trauma. And Vanessa grew up carrying something that had no language yet. A body full of damage, a mind full of gaps, and the knowledge, always present, of what she had survived and what she had lost. In high school, she started using drugs and alcohol. The pain needed somewhere to go, and she gave it the only exits she could find. By her late teens, it had become something she couldn't control. By her 20s, she was deep inside an addiction that cost her relationships, stability, a son who was removed from her care, years of her life spent in a cycle of homelessness and arrest and starting over that felt, again and again, like it would never end. She attempted to take her own life. She lost children to the system she had needed to protect her. She woke up in places no one should wake up, carrying the weight of a night she couldn't even remember, paying every single day for something that was never her fault. At 30, something shifted. She decided, not dramatically, not with a single clean moment of clarity, but slowly and stubbornly, that she was done being destroyed by what had been done to her. She went to rehab, she got clean, she rebuilt, piece by piece, the life that had been interrupted before it even started. She reconnected with her adult son. She found a partner. She began to speak publicly about what she had survived, not for sympathy, but because she understood that her story, as brutal as it was, might be the thing that helped someone else keep going. I tried to stop being a victim, she said in a 2020 interview, and turn it into empowering myself, into being a survivor. She still lives with PTSD, with bipolar disorder, with paralysis on the left side of her body that will never fully resolve. She has no memory of her family, not her mother's voice, not her father's face, not the birthday party the night before the world ended. She is building a life around an absence so large, most people couldn't imagine standing next to it. And she is still standing. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. On August 6, 2021, they returned their verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts. Bruce Bennett, Deborah Bennett, Melissa Bennett. The judge looked at Alex Ewing and did not reach for careful language. He called it an abomination. 3 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. The same possibility of freedom that Ewing had been quietly preparing for. The parole paperwork, the dating profile, the plans, was gone. Permanently, completely. The judge asked if Ewing had anything to say. He looked up from the defense table. No, thank you. That was it. 2 words. The sum total of what Alex Christopher Ewing offered to the family he had destroyed, to the city he had terrorized, to the little girl who had just stood in that courtroom and bled in public so that the record would be complete. No, thank you. In 2022, the trial for Patricia Smith's murder reached its conclusion. Another jury, another verdict, another life sentence, his 4th added to the 3 he was already carrying. Patricia's family had waited 38 years. They got their answer in the same year Vanessa got hers. Connie Bennett was in that courtroom for all of it. The woman who had driven to East Center Drive on a cold Monday morning because her gut told her something was wrong, who had found her son at the bottom of a staircase, who had spent 37 years attending every update, every meeting, every hearing, holding on to something that most people would have let go of long before. She stood up and looked at the man who had killed her son. Some people, she said, may call him an animal, but I won't. Because I think animals have a purpose in this world. And then, outside the courthouse, someone asked her if she finally had closure. She thought about it for a moment. It's not closure, she said, but we've learned to live with it. There is a garage door at the center of the story, left open on a cold Sunday night in January 1984 by a man who was tired and warm and had no reason in the world to think it mattered. A small thing, an ordinary thing, the kind of thing that happens in neighborhoods across the country every single night without consequence. Bruce Bennett nodded when his brother reminded him, and then he went inside. And then 3 people died, and a 3-year-old girl spent the next 4 decades rebuilding a life from the wreckage of a single night she cannot even remember. That is not a lesson about garage doors. It is something harder and more important than that, a reminder that ordinary moments carry weight we cannot always see, that the people we love deserve to be told so today, not later, that safety is fragile and brief and worth protecting with both hands. Bruce Bennett was a Navy veteran who wanted to be an air traffic controller. He never got there. Deborah Bennett was a woman who held her family together through loss and came out the other side stronger. She deserved more years. Melissa Bennett was 7 years old and she wanted a real birthday party. She never got to have it. And Vanessa Bennett, the miracle, the survivor, the woman who stood in that courtroom at 40 years old and told the truth about what it costs to be the one who lived, is still here, still standing, still refusing to let the darkness be the last word. She is the reason this story gets to end with something other than just grief. And if you have someone you love, go tell them. Right now, don't wait. What do you think justice really means for a case like this? Is 4 life sentences enough? Or does something always remain unpaid? Vanessa rebuilt her life after decades of pain. What does her story say to you about the human capacity to survive? If DNA technology had existed in 1984, how different do you think the outcome would have been, and how many lives could have been saved?